Good afternoon and welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday. It's 12:30 in the afternoon on the 28th of June today when I'm doing this recording, and boy, has it been cold. We're over the shortest day, but it was 0 degrees last night. I have a bit of a cold, so please excuse me if I have to suddenly make things go blank and have a bit of a cough, but I'll battle on. I'm sure I'll be all right today. I want to start off by saying a big thank you, special thank you to all of our people involved in the radio station and the TV, to our sponsors, T.G. McCarthy Trust and New Zealand On Air, and all those wonderful sponsors who help this place keep ticking along. It's not an easy job. It's a very thankless task, and, thanks to people who make a huge effort, folks like the people at Wairarapa TV, thanks for coming on board and just helping us to spread out into the different branches of the media. And most importantly, a special thanks to Michael and Veronica, who have supported me for many years. I'd like to say a big welcome to all those people up in the beautiful Hawke's Bay. Hi, good to have you along. It's mental health has become quite an issue now. It's one of those popularist things. Everyone's jumped on board, and I hear people banging on about it all the time now, and it's kind of ironic that for years and years we've been struggling along without any support really at all, other than the listeners here spreading the good word and a few decent people along the way, and all of a sudden this thing has mushroomed into something massive, and now all of a sudden everybody cares about mental health. Hundreds and even thousands of people died before anyone could be bothered lifting a finger, other than a few of us, and that's galling to some degree too, and it's sad to see that with such a massive slush fund the government has, that they can't sponsor shows like ours, which my show really just tries to deal with my experiences. I've walked many a mile down that path, and there's nothing quite as bitter or as thorough as experience to teach you a few simple lessons, and sometimes you've got to bang your head against the wall for quite a long time before you come to realise that a few small changes can make a big, big difference. I'd just like to emphasise the fact that no child, no baby is ever born evil. They pick that up, and they pick that up pretty quick, and when children are troubled and disturbed, they lash out, bite, kick, punch. I'm talking about little children, the age of about 2. This is when it all begins, and those troubled children go on to become troubled adults, and they are the ones that commit suicide, commit crime, suffer from mental health problems, and they can be nipped in the bud very, very early. And you don't need to punish kids for that. You need to get to the root source of their frustration, because they have emotions just like adults, but they don't know how to control them. They don't know anything other than screaming and lashing out, and we need to get those very young vulnerable people of 2 and 3 and 4 years old and help them and make them happy, because if they are happy, they'll make others around them happy and empower themselves. And that's how we do it. We empower each other. If you ignore the situation, they will go on to live terrible lives and destroy everything and everyone around them. That's how it works. It can show up in later life if someone is bullied and picked on. Most kids are busy just trying to be the same as everyone else, but we shouldn't really reinforce that. We should encourage children to be individuals and celebrate the differences that they show, because diversity leads to a healthy society. And, we have to show respect and appreciation for all people, gay, straight, smart, dumb. It doesn't really matter who or what you are. Everyone has the same rights and should be treated with the same degree of respect. But unfortunately, what we tend to do is we pick on people who are different and we make them pariahs. And those people suffer really badly. So my show today is about showing kindness and consideration for other people. If you want this country, this world, the society to be better, then it comes down to you and how you treat those around you, because you'll be surprised what an enormous effect what you do has on everybody else, and the power that you have to help and to save. All it takes is a kind word. That's pretty much it. Kind actions, well, yeah, then you're a real champion. You're one of mine. If you can do something nice for someone you don't know that well, you can make a huge difference. And every time you see something and you turn your back and walk away, you have damaged that person. Where you could have done something, anything, even just a kind word makes a huge difference. Teaching children to be polite, common courtesy, to say please and thank you, and not to do nasty things, and don't just ignore things that you're not happy with. Say something and you will feel better about it. And it's the old story of the stone rolling down a hill. Once it gets a little bit of momentum, it becomes easy. So, it's all about how you act, how you behave towards others, and that makes a huge difference to people suffering from mental health problems. If they're suffering from depression, all it really takes is for one person to start that stone rolling, and from there, that one small step towards wellness gains momentum, and that person can not only get better, but help others by the fact that they've had to walk that road and they have true empathy. They are not on the outside of the goldfish bowl looking in, they live in it. And that gives you a far greater appreciation of what people have to go through every single day. You can't just turn it on and off. It is there permanently. Although, of course, a lot of mental health problems, they are curable. It is a recoverable situation. It just takes a bit of time and effort at the ground level from us. Alright, that's 7 minutes, and now we've got to kick on. I've written a whole load of short stories. In fact, I've written 4 more just over the last couple of months. This is an oldie bit of beauty. I was about 22 when I went to Africa. I lived there for a couple of years, and I spent 5 years living in Europe. Bit of time in Southeast Asia, so I spent a lot of time overseas, and I got to know a lot of people and see a lot of things. And I think really the biggest wow for me, the thing that really blew me away, was Africa. I kind of knew what to expect, but that's the difference between seeing it from the outside and actually being there. Being in Africa at the time, just before Nelson Mandela was released, I saw the last 2 years of apartheid in South Africa, and it was quite something. It was terribly sad, but fascinating, and I must say Africa is a truly exceptional place. I was in southern Africa, and it was pretty amazing. And this is one of those stories. I hope to publish these someday. If you ever see them, buy my book. Make me a bit of dough, and I'll make it go around. This story, my friends, is called Travels in South Africa. I lived in South Africa for the reign of the last 2 white presidents, Pik Botha and F.W. de Klerk. In 2.5 years, I travelled down the garden route of the East Coast, back up through the middle to Johannesburg and Pretoria. What struck me in the first few days in Johannesburg was the armed soldiers standing on every corner of every governmental building. I felt great unease at the sight of machine guns in the hands of young men. Racial segregation was still apparent everywhere, from the all-black labouring gangs on building sites to all-white industries like the legal system. There was a sense of nervousness and civil unrest, with the neighbouring Soweto slums splitting at the seams. There were constant reports of killings and rallies at funerals for political radicals. Nelson Mandela was still on Robben Island at the time I arrived, but it was obvious he would soon be released. That would be the catalyst for true democracy and the end of the current apartheid regime. It was obvious the country itself was not ready for all the changes that were about to happen. The 5 major home states of the black people had no infrastructure, lacking simple things like power and water to homes. They were little more than unsightly slums that were in stark contrast to the rest of the country. All of the country outside these home states had an air of normality, and the main cities of each state seemed quite successful despite world trade sanctions. Every city had its own version of segregation, with the Afrikaners living in affluent suburbs in Johannesburg, with huge fences around their perimeters. Every fence was solid and topped with broken bottles and razor wire, giving them a typical fortress effect. The other white tribe were the English speakers, who spoke English as a first language and held British passports. They lived in suburbs with lower fences, but bars on every door and window. The 2 white tribes were segregated in subtle ways in Johannesburg, but the black people were forced to live in neighbouring Soweto, which at the time numbered some 5 million souls living in poverty. The populations of the white people in each city had a noticeably nicer neighbourhood and had better schooling for their kids. That led to better job opportunities for jobs and industries run by their own people. The system was self-supporting, as South Africa is still rich in diamonds and gold. Fortunes extracted from the earth, however, did not translate to an even spread of wealth. At the other end of the scale were 33 black tribes in South Africa, some of which had no real representation in government and suffered terribly as a result. The people of Indian descent were caught in the middle and referred to as coloured. They had some political representation in places like Durban in Natal province. About a quarter of Durban is made up of Indians, and it surprised me to see such large numbers of Indians. In nearby Ladysmith, their famous son, Mahatma Gandhi, worked as a lawyer before becoming famous for his peace protesting and political career. Despite some influence, they lived as second-class citizens and tended to live mainly along the east coast. In Durban, there are some 11 kilometres of beautiful coastline with wonderful beaches all the way round. In the middle, on the wealthiest section of the strip, were 2 beautiful skyscrapers, the Maharani and the Ilangeni. One had a glass lift up the outside of the building to a nightclub at the top. Despite its political isolation, places like Durban, with its massive port, managed to thrive. Apartheid had a weaker hold on the population of Durban as opposed to Pretoria and Johannesburg. It seemed to lessen as we headed south and away from the spiritual and political homeland of the Afrikaners. So it seemed to hold true as we pulled into Cape Town with its incredible Table Mountain and Lion Rock. Cape Town itself seemed far more at ease with itself, with far less obvious segregation. We booked ourselves an apartment in the Green Lane area of the Cape and returned to take the gondola ride up Table Mountain, which is a flat plateau. The view from the top was simply breathtaking, as the mountain offers a 180-degree panoramic view. It felt like God's window on the world from up there, and reminded me of the Drakensberg Ranges with its spectacular view over the city below. No matter which direction you look in this beautiful city, Table Mountain dominates with its awe-inspiring presence. Cape Town had some decent nightlife as well. We found a place called the Pig and Whistle, which was a great place for a feed, then drink and dance to a local rock band. We had a great time there, drinking and dancing on the tables, as was the custom there. There was a noticeable lessening of segregation here too, with all races allowed on the same buses and some of the same beaches. Even so, there was talk of the local Cape Malay people suffering poverty and squatter camps springing up on the outskirts. In all our travels around southern Africa, Cape Town was probably the most relaxed and free from the political plague that apartheid had become. Its great beauty is icing on the cake, and it is a place that stays long in the memory, as it must rate as one of the most beautiful cities in all the world. Altogether too soon, we headed up country from Cape Town to Stellenbosch, through the Little and Great Karoo to Kimberley. The famous diamond mining town features a 1 kilometre hole in the ground, and the area still produces diamonds to this day. The area also features some particularly fine vineyards, and we were treated to some wonderful wine. Even so, there was a marked difference in the political situation as we drove up north. By the time we reached the Orange Free State, we were back in the old South Africa we had witnessed in Pretoria and Johannesburg. It was strange to see different versions of apartheid in the one place. All of the country was in a state of permanent change, like it or not. The last two successive white governments realised they were little more than night watchmen, waiting for the new South Africa to be born. They mainly concerned themselves with trying to keep law and order and stopping the country from spiralling into war, as so many of its neighbours had done. Right, I think we'll kick on. Normally I'd play you a song at this point, but 13 minutes, we'll see how we go at the end. I think we'll just kick on with the story for now, and we'll bring you part two. Part two. One of our more interesting little adventures happened in Durban, when we went to the Currie Cup rugby finals. Standing out as Kiwis meant we met plenty of people interested in our journey and our impressions of the country. They were wonderful hosts, and one guy, Dave, offered to introduce us to a rugby-mad friend, Api Kitching, who lived with his family under a local stadium at Parks Rugby Club. He took us from Kings Park to Parks Rugby Club to meet Api, who immediately asked the four of us to stay with him and meet some of his friends. Api, who was Afrikaans, and his wife, an English speaker, were wonderful hosts and lived in an amazing flat built under the stadium Api looked after. We stayed for a few days before Api took us out to the countryside to Patenzing to meet some friends who grew oranges for a living. We didn't know what to expect and were amazed to see orchards as far as the eye could see in a valley serviced by a large dam they had built for themselves. We were taken to the homestead of Zol Ferreira, a descendant of Portuguese and Afrikaans, who had carved out an oasis for themselves in this very harsh land. As well as oranges, Zol had an ostrich farm for extra income. Another relative and neighbour kept antelopes for local consumption in local braai fests, or barbecue feasts, held for all the local folks. The first day and night we stayed there, Zol turned on one of these massive feasts for the four of us. All of the neighbours from miles around came over to meet us, and it turned out most of them were related. They lived in their valley, pretty isolated from the rest of the country, in a small microcosm of South Africa. Whilst there, we met a relative, Espy Ferreira, the richest of the orchardists, who invited us to come over and visit. He owned a massive orchard in the middle of the valley, along with the local packing sheds, a bottle store and a few other shops in the small village he and his ancestors had built. He also had many black folks working for him, and their families lived on his land in very primitive conditions. The orchardists there could not see why the black workers should live any differently, despite the massive contrast in their lives. Even so, the orchardists were heavily armed in case of civil uprising. They were very isolated in Patenzing, and almost all of them belonged to the Dutch Reformed Church and are staunch believers. We stayed at Zol Ferreira's place, as they had plenty of room with servants to help run the place. It was very strange for me to be waited on by mates, but they seemed very happy with their situation. There was also plenty of land and hills to explore, and on our third night there we headed up the back of the property to catch some live game. The idea was to spotlight the antelope using utes, then to herd them up and jump off the back of the utes and rugby tackle them and tie them up. It was a dangerous exercise jumping off the back of the utes in the dark at some speed, so it was left to the black folks to do. I joined up with them in the back of the ute, and soon we were jumping out to tackle the poor panicking antelope. A few guys got quite badly banged up, and we managed to capture 3 female buck, which were trussed up and transported to a local farm. I was surprised that everyone took their situation in life without question or complaint, but that was how they had grown up and had never known any different. Even so, it was difficult to talk to the black folks living in Patenzing, as they did not want to offend the white orchardists who employed them. It seems there was little option for them, and schooling was a luxury not afforded them. I felt sad for them, as I could not see that any form of democracy would change their lot. This was the case in much of South Africa, and no magic wand of political change would free people from their predestined place in society. The black people living in Patenzing seemed to care little for the change about to happen, and it was obvious that significant change would happen a generation at a time. It had to start with literacy and political awareness before any significant change could take place. As far as the orchardists were concerned, they had carved out this piece of paradise with their own hands and could not see any reason for change. They were worried that the future would bring change to their well-ordered society and the country would fall into chaos. They had already watched as Angola, Mozambique, northern and southern Rhodesia had gone through civil war and fallen into rack and ruin. They did not believe that Mandela could bring change without civil uprising, and their fears seemed well-founded. They did not, however, see anything wrong with the existing system, as it offered stability and certainty. In the end, however, it was a numbers game, and when everyone in the country was granted a vote, their point of view would be swept aside in a wave of change. Our hosts were really decent people who could not do enough for us, so I felt sorry for them as well as they faced a world of change. The future was uncertain, but everyone hoped it would spell an end of political sanctions and allow South Africa to rejoin the rest of the free world. I was surprised at the Africans' resilience despite being in the political wilderness. For all of its troubles, it was easily the most sophisticated and robust of the countries we visited in southern Africa. That resilience gave me hope that they would find a way to cope with the change about to come. After a wonderful and enlightening stay at Patenzing, it was altogether too soon that we had to say goodbye. The valley really was a microcosm of South Africa itself, with an uncertain future, but the potential to grow and flourish with new change. In the many years since I visited South Africa, the ANC's Mandela government came and went. It did not deliver the hoped-for change, but to me was astonishing for the lack of bloodshed. The Mandela government was able to convey the message of hope and especially forgiveness. This stopped the country from descending into civil war and allowed a smoother transition from white to majority rule. I was surprised at the lack of civil unrest and hoped this peaceful beginning would lead to a prosperous future. Unfortunately, this was too much to expect, as South Africa was very set in its ways, and not all change could happen quickly. Many people hoped for immediate change, whereas real and meaningful change will more likely take generations. I think the Mandela years delivered all it was capable of. I hope the future will bring the freedoms all of South Africa's people yearn for. I believe it is now up to all of the countries who placed embargoes and sanctions to deliver on promises of acceptance and open trade. I expect, however, South Africa will take a long time to recover, and I feel sorry for all those wonderful people I met on my journeys. I look back now on that journey with a melancholy heart, as it is a place where I felt a little piece of where I left a little piece of myself. I will never forget the promise of the burning sunrise and the incredible red sunsets of a place I came to love. I hope for her a better future. The end. Well, that's just about me for another day. I must say, South Africa is a wonderful, wonderful country. It is huge, far bigger than you realise, and, the life, the game is incredible, and the people themselves, all the people I met, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Zulus, the English speakers, the Afrikaners, all that mix. They call it the Rainbow Nation, and it's got people from all over the world. There are more Indians in South Africa than any other place outside India itself. So you're talking about millions of Indians, and they just add that little extra something, that's something special, as do the Muslims to that country. They are a very important part of what's going on in southern Africa, and I've never seen people with such a positive attitude and such amazing resilience. No matter how tough it gets, those people never give up. They always dream of a better future, and I really admire them. South Africans are really wonderful people, and unfortunately, a lot of the white people who lived there and had nothing to do with apartheid got branded with that and were made social pariahs. And I found that so sad, because there were amazing people, wonderful people on both sides. And I'm happy now to see that a little bit of justice and a little bit of fairness has been spread throughout the country, but I really believe that the rest of the world needs to come on and support them, because from their success, other success will come. South Africa supports its neighbours. They give food to Botswana and Zimbabwe and places like that. They help out in a big, big way, and they are an extremely important player. South Africa is the most important player in southern Africa. It is a powerhouse, as is Turkey, another very underrated country that deserves better treatment. Well, that's me for another day, so thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you again next week. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye for now.